started a timely 3-week series called Adventure. And the title, let me just bring us up to speed. The series title is Adventure, plays on the word Advent. And the meaning of Advent is the arrival of a person or event or thing. And particularly a lot of people associate that with the arrival of Christmas. So our goal is to build anticipation over these 3 weeks for Christmas, looking at the bigger picture of the Christmas narrative and in the Bible. So here's a roadmap for the series. Last week we looked at the events leading up to the Christmas story. And specifically we saw in Luke chapter 1 how God brought about the birth of John the Baptist with great joy and power to prepare the way for Jesus. And that happened both surrounding their births and 3 decades later in their full-time ministries. They were announcing hope. This morning we're going to look at the events closely following the Christmas story and giving us a bigger picture of the grand significance of what happened with the Christmas story, with Jesus' birth. And then in our next meeting, which is 2 weeks from now because of Thanksgiving break, we'll kind of reach the climax of the series going through the Christmas story itself. So there are some interesting insights in Luke 2, verses 21 through 39, which I encourage you to read on your own. There's too much to go through this morning. Let's summarize that for you. They talk about a couple of people in the temple who prophesied about the Messiah and about the redemption of the world when they saw little infant Jesus come into the temple. And I want to spend our time this morning looking at Matthew's account, which picks up after Luke's account. And one thing I should point out, though, from Luke's account is because of some of the law requirements, fulfilling the law of Moses, Mary and Joseph had to bring Jesus to the temple 8 days after he was born. They had to go back there 40 days after he was born. So they ended up just settling in Bethlehem, which was about 5 miles from Jerusalem, instead of going back to Nazareth, which was about 100 miles away. So that's key that they stayed there in Bethlehem. Now let's look at Matthew's account. You can turn there because we're going to look at quite a bit in Matthew chapter 2. The book of Matthew was written by Matthew Levi, who was the tax collector who became one of Jesus' 12 disciples. And we're going to start in Matthew 2, verses 1 and 2. Matthew 2, verses 1 and 2. It says, "After Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, 'Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, and have come to worship him.'" Notice that it says after Jesus was born, not when Jesus was born. Contrary to probably every nativity scene you've ever looked at, and every nativity play you've ever been to, the wise men did not show up on the night of Jesus' birth. They didn't show up at the manger. It says after Jesus was born. After Jesus was born, they came from the east to Jerusalem. And we're actually going to unpack some of the dates of this morning. If we're looking carefully, these 2 verses should actually raise a number of questions in Matthew 2, verses 1 and 2. Like, what are wise men? Where in the east did they come from? Why would they want to worship a Jewish king? And how could they tell all this from a star? If we're thinking about the passage, it should raise questions like that. So for that last question, why would they even look to the stars for this sort of knowledge? I've got a video clip about this. This is from Chronicles of Narnia, Prince Caspian.
He's a Telmary. Why would we want him as our king?
Beyond these woods, I'm a prince. The Telmary throne is right on mine. Help me pray, and I can bring peace between us.
It is true. The time is right. I watch the sky, for it is mine to watch as it is yours. and the Lamb, the Lady of Peace, have come together in the high heaven. Now he, Son of Adam, has come forth to offer us back our freedom.
So are we saying the wise men were centaurs from Narnia? Is Narnia east of Jerusalem? It's not what we're talking about. But the Chronicles of Narnia is a fiction novel series written by a Christian author named C.S. Lewis. And the series is very symbolic of Christianity. And Lewis was an apologist, which didn't mean he apologized a lot. It meant that he carefully studied the facts and the evidence about the New Testament, about the Bible. And in his storyline, the Narnian creatures were waiting for the fulfillment of a prophecy of a human king that would come and bring them freedom. And the centaur knew to watch the sky for the timing of this fulfillment. The Bible does talk about watching the sky and discerning signs in heaven. Isaiah 40, verse 26 says, "Lift up your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? He who brings out the starry host one by one, calls forth each of them by name. Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing." And then in Luke 21:25, Jesus himself said, "There will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars." So Jesus said, it's okay, I'm going to show you things up there, so it's okay to look. And that's where these wise men were looking. What about the rest of those questions about who the wise men were? We're going to take an educated guess about who they were. If you know much of the history of the kingdom of Israel, you probably remember that the kingdom divided into two kingdoms. There was the northern kingdom of Israel or Samaria and the southern kingdom of Judah. And because of idolatry and other sins, both kingdoms went off into captivity and into exile. And the Babylonian Empire under King Nebuchadnezzar captured Judah, captured Jerusalem, the capital city. And when Nebuchadnezzar captured a nation, instead of killing them, he would deport them to another place. He would give them Babylonian names, kind of steal their national heritage. He would relocate them to a good land, give them good jobs. And then they would start to think, hey, this king of Babylon is not so bad, let's just stay here. And then they don't think about rebelling against him, which is kind of smart. So Nebuchadnezzar would also seek out the best of those foreign youth who were nobility, and they would be trained for 3 years in the ways of Babylon, and then brought in to serve before the king in his court. So we're going to look at Daniel 1, verses 18 through 20. Daniel 1, verses 18 through 20. It says, "At the end of the time, at the end of those 3 years, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. The king spoke with them, and among all of them, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah." And the Babylonian names the king gave Daniel's 3 friends were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore, they stood before the king, and in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in all his kingdom. So, I'm going to bring in a little more insight here. The Septuagint is a famous Greek translation of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Old Testament. And the Old Testament was written in Hebrew, the New Testament was written in Greek. So when we're trying to compare words and meanings of specific things, it's kind of hard to compare the Old Testament and New Testament sometimes. Except that this Greek translation kind of brings those together and builds a bridge. And the Septuagint was translated about 300 years before the New Testament was written. So in the Septuagint, the word magicians that we just read in Daniel 1:20 is the Greek word magus, which is the same Greek word translated as wise men in Matthew 2, chapter 1. So Greek magus equals wise men or magicians or magi. And now that doesn't mean they performed magic tricks and did magic. They advised the king based on their wisdom and knowledge of both science and their religions, whatever they practiced. So here's a theory. Could the wise men, could the magi who saw the star have been royal advisors trained under 14 generations of discipleship from the time of Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Remember, their wisdom was 10 times better than any of Nebuchadnezzar's other magi. Well, where was Babylon compared to Jerusalem? Let's look at the map up there. Babylon's several hundred miles east of Jerusalem. And who would care about the birth of a Jewish king several hundred miles away? Someone who's Jewish, right? They would care about that. And who would want to worship that king? Certainly a Jew wouldn't worship any normal human king unless they thought that king was the Messiah. Then they would probably go and worship him. So these particular magi must have been students of astronomy to notice all this. But still, there must have been something extraordinary happening in the sky for them to come to these conclusions and make that long journey to Bethlehem. They did not have Kepler's laws of planetary motion. They didn't have all the math figured out, but they were students of watching it. So, this doesn't necessitate that these events were supernatural in the sky. Remember, God created the stars and invented all the laws of planetary motion. He could have made a supernatural miracle star for the Christmas star. Absolutely. But he also could have planned it from the beginning that the clockwork of the universe would line up perfectly at the right time to do something amazing. And we're going to run with that idea because someone actually found that. There was a lawyer named Rick Larson recently who stumbled across this to satisfy his own curiosity, and it's become a major ministry of outreach. And he's the one who did the Star of Bethlehem movie, and we're going to look at his conclusions this morning. He takes a lot longer time to get there, but we're going to look at the results. First, let's continue the account of the wise men, going back to Matthew chapter 2. We're going to start again with verse 2 and read through verse 10. Matthew 2, 2 through 10. Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him, and assembled all the chief priests and scribes of the people. He inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet, and you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him. And listening to the king, they went on their way. Behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them till it came to rest over the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. So, think about that Christmas star. The Christmas star had to do some pretty spectacular things. This list of requirements that it had to fulfill. We're going to look at those. There were 9 requirements. If we're looking for something in the sky, something has to meet 9 requirements for this to line up. The first one says signified birth. The star signified birth. 2, it signified kingship. Signified kingship. 3, it signified Jewish. It signified Jewish. Number 4, it rose in the east, like most stars. Number 5, it appeared at a precise time. It appeared at a precise time. Okay, number 6. It was not obvious to the casual observer. Herod had to ask what time it appeared. So it wasn't something that was obvious to someone who just looked up one night. 7, it endured over time. 8, it was ahead of the Magi as they went south from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. So it was in the southern sky at that time. It was ahead of the Magi as they went south from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. And number 9, it stopped over Bethlehem. That's a pretty spectacular list for something in the sky to do all of that. But let me cut to the chase and tell you that there was, in fact, something in the clockwork sky that fulfilled all 9 of those requirements. And, all right, hopefully everyone's caught up now. We can now know that the Christmas star was the planet Jupiter. Christmas star was the planet Jupiter. That's a pretty bold statement, but I'm going to show you why we can come to that conclusion. For thousands of years, planets were known as wandering stars. So it's not really an issue that they called it a star instead of a planet. But because of the rotation of the Earth, because we live in the northern hemisphere, when we look at the night sky, there's the North Star, and everything else in the sky kind of rotates around the North Star. Stars rise in the east when it gets dark, and stars set in the west. But planets that look just like stars in the sky, instead of just being in that fixed grid that rotates, planets kind of loop through the sky like that. And that's why they were called wandering stars. And also that those stars and planets and constellations have had common names for thousands of years. And that's going to come into play in recognizing these signs that God put in the sky. Since Johannes Kepler published his laws of planetary motion, as the early 1600s, we've been able to pinpoint with exact precision when let me say that again. Okay. We've been able to pinpoint with exact precision the location of any planet or star we know about from any vantage point on Earth at any time in history. The math is in place. We can know exactly where everything was. Now, that used to require a mountain of math and pen and ink and paper to figure that out. And you go through that mountain, and then you have one pinpoint data point. And you have to go through it again to figure out, looking at it from a different place or a different time. But now that's easy with computers. The software does it all for us, does all that math. So one of the first things Kepler actually looked for when he figured out these laws, he looked for the Christmas star. And he looked and he looked and he never found it. And it literally, he never found it because of a typo that happened in the history book in the year 1544. Which seems pretty weird. But someone was putting the ancient book Antiquities by Jewish historian Josephus into print on the printing press now. And this error indicated that King Herod the Great had died in the year 4 BC. Obviously, Herod was alive when Jesus was born. So if he died in 4 BC, everybody was looking at the years 5 and 6 BC for the birth of Jesus. And then almost every copy of book Antiquities that was printed after that propagated that typo. But if you look at the handwritten manuscripts that were copied before 1544, they indicate that Herod had died in the year 1 BC, which totally changes where you would look in the sky. So by the time people had the math figured out, everybody was looking at the wrong place and the wrong time. Until just recently. So when you look at the sky in the right time range, this is what you find. In September of 3 BC, which just happened to be the start of the Jewish New Year, Jupiter came into conjunction with the star Regulus. And conjunction means they passed really close to each other in the sky. And now here's where the names come into play. Jupiter is the king planet, named after the Roman king of the gods in Roman mythology, named Jupiter. Regulus, as in regal, is the king star. So the king planet came into conjunction with the king star at the start of the Jewish New Year. And Regulus is the brightest star in the constellation Leo, the lion. And in Genesis 49, verses 9 and 10, Jacob gave a blessing to his son Judah, comparing him to a lion and prophesying that the Messiah would come through his descendants. So in the sky we can see king, we can see Jewish, particularly Judean. And then the constellation that rises after Leo in the sky is Virgo, the Virgin. Isaiah 7:14 said that a virgin would conceive and give birth to the Messiah. So, September 3 BC, Jupiter comes into conjunction with Regulus in the constellation Leo, and as it rose in the east, it was just before dawn. So, these magi astronomers would have known the next constellation that to come up would be Virgo, except the sun came up instead, closely followed by a new moon. And Revelation 12, verses 1 and 2 and verse 5, says, "A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant, was crying out in birth pains, in the agony of giving birth." And verse 5, "She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. Her child was caught up to God and to his throne." Any guesses who the child and the woman are? Passage in Revelation. Pretty obvious that it's talking about Mary and Jesus. So John wasn't describing some fantastically symbolic vision at that point in Revelation. He was just describing what the constellations looked like on the night that Jesus was born. So then, the Magi continue to watch the sky from the east. They see Jupiter go into retrograde motion. That means it's starting to go backwards, starting to do one of its loops. Jupiter passes right by Regulus a second time, finishes the loop, passes right by Regulus a third time, a triple conjunction, which is extremely rare. So, at the beginning of the Jewish New Year, I'll lay these out for us. At the beginning of the Jewish New Year, the king planet Jupiter had a triple conjunction with the king star Regulus. King planet Jupiter had a triple conjunction with the king star Regulus. That was in the constellation Leo the Lion. In the constellation Leo the Lion. Followed by Virgo, the Virgin Virgo, clothed in the sun with the moon at her feet. That's pretty amazing what God did in the sky there. So at the beginning of the Jewish New Year, King planet Jupiter had a triple conjunction with the king star Regulus in the constellation Leo the Lion, followed by the Virgin Virgo, clothed in the sun with the moon at her feet. So then as Jupiter passes through the rest of the constellations, in June of 2 BC, the next June, Jupiter has a conjunction with Venus, which is the mother planet. And this conjunction is so close you could not tell them apart with the naked eye. And if the Magi had a telescope to be able to look at it, they would have seen Jupiter and Venus stacked on each other like a figure eight. So both of the planets are contributing their full light to this conjunction. So 9 months later, the king planet Jupiter came in conjunction with the mother planet Venus, resulting in the brightest star anyone had ever seen. 9 9 months later, the king planet Jupiter came in conjunction with the mother planet Venus, resulting in the brightest star anyone had ever seen. And this is when the wise men left for Jerusalem, when they saw this bright star. Why Jerusalem? Where else would you go look for the Jewish king? It took them, let's say it took them close to 6 months to get there. They're watching the sky, they're traveling several hundred miles away. It took them 6 months to get there. And they arrived in Jerusalem, they asked Herod about it. Herod didn't know, so he asked the scribes, and they said the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. And Bethlehem was 5 miles south of Jerusalem. And then they consult the sky again, see where Jupiter is, and there it is in the southern sky in front of them as they look south towards Bethlehem. And then Jupiter starts one of its loops again. It goes into retrograde motion. It's a very, very shallow loop. And so as it slows down to begin that loop, from our vantage point, it appears to stop. And it stopped right above Bethlehem. So Jupiter stopped, entered retrograde motion directly over Bethlehem. Jupiter stopped, entered retrograde motion directly over Bethlehem. Here's the timeline, the biblical picture instead of the star picture. Jesus was conceived in September of 3 BC. Jesus was born in June of 2 BC. Guess what day Jupiter stopped over the little town of Bethlehem? 6 months after June. The Magi came to Mary and Joseph's house bringing gifts on December 25th of 2 BC. The Magi came to Mary and Joseph's house bringing gifts on December 25th of 2 BC. Now, of course, nobody had any clue when it was decided that December 25th would be when we celebrate Christmas. Nobody had any clue about this happening in the constellations. So I think that's just a testament to God's sense of humor when He made the universe. So let's continue in Matthew. We're going to read the rest of this section. Matthew 2:11 through 23. Going into the house, notice it says house, not a barn or a cave where a manger was. They saw the child with Mary his mother. They fell down and worshipped him. And opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh. By the way, those gifts were also extremely symbolic, but I'll save that for a different Christmas series. Verse 12, being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. Now when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, Rise, take the child and his mother and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him. And he rose and took the child and Mary his mother by night and departed to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. Out of Egypt I called my son. Then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious, and he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem, and all that region who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. And verse 19. When Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, Rise, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead. And he rose, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. When he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Being warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee, and he went and lived in a city called Nazareth, so that was spoken by the prophets might be fulfilled, that he would be called a Nazarene. So, remember that description in the book of Revelation, a pregnant woman clothed in the sun with the moon at her feet. I'm going to read a few more verses there. Revelation 12, verses 1 through 6. Revelation 12, 1 through 6. A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant, was crying out with birth pains, with the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns. On his head 7 diadems. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it. She gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. Her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God, in which she is to be nourished 1,260 days. So after the Magi show up, Mary and Joseph fled to Egypt. Revelation gives us the insight that it was for 1,260 days, which is for 3.5 years. So Jesus was 6 months old when the wise men came, go to Egypt for 3.5 years. So Jesus is a 4-year-old when they finally go back to their hometown of Nazareth. So I told you we'd see the grand significance of the Christmas story this morning. And I called it Hope is Here. And that's because God grandly announced all this through prophecies, and he announced it in the sky. And he perfectly orchestrated the timing of all that. This means that the moment Jesus created the universe, he knew exactly what time and place and location in history he would enter humanity to bring us hope. The moment Jesus created the universe, he knew exactly what time and place and location in history he would enter humanity to bring us true hope. Because once he created the universe, he put those laws of planetary motion in place. Rick Larson, who figured all this out, his website is BethlehemStar.net, and his movie, The Star of Bethlehem, also show how God perfectly orchestrated something in the sky at the crucifixion as well. And if you're intrigued by that stuff like I am, I encourage you to visit his website or watch the DVD. In 2 weeks, we are going to bring the series to its climax by looking at the actual Christmas story. And we're going to explain this hope that we've been talking about. So keep inviting your friends. It'll be a good opportunity for them to come that Sunday, the last Sunday of the semester. So let me pray.